This is the Conservative American Message, hosted by yours truly, the one, the only, Cam Lau. Before I get into today's episode, I have to ask one small favor. Please go ahead and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen and share the show with your friends. It really helps us grow the show. We've had to turn down multiple sponsors that just don't align with our values, so I'm totally relying on you guys to help us grow this thing. Thank you for your continued support. If you want to kind of tell us about who you are and your background and that to get us started off.
Okay. Well, let's see. I'm recently retired from the federal government as a speechwriter. I started my federal career with the Marine Corps way back in 1981 and left the Marines and then did a few things. And I guess I was a writer, editor, or speechwriter for the government for 20 years. And as I say, recently retired. And I started writing my book, at least 20 years ago. It's over 20 years that I first started. And I guess that's why we're here.
Yeah. So your book, Money and Liberty, I guess what I understand, I haven't totally read the whole thing yet, but I've got into a little bit of it. And I think the premise is basically that we're misunderstanding the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So, what is the biggest misconceptions that you see around our rights in these founding documents?
Well, I think there are three big things in the book. I forget, like 12 chapters, but three big ones. And a great deal of it's about money. But the first misconception is not about money. And it is the hugest misconception of all. It revolves around the Bill of Rights. So at the convention, the men who are writing the U.S. Constitution at the convention, someone proposes late in the game, very late at the convention, they propose that we have a Bill of Rights. And this idea was rejected nearly unanimously. So let's start with that. The Bill of Rights has absolutely nothing to do with the Founding Fathers or the framers of the Constitution. That's two separate groups that people always confuse. They are two separate groups of people. That's a minor quibble. The framers rejected the idea overwhelmingly, nearly unanimously. They thought it was a very bad idea. And they were correct. I'll say now what I think of the Bill of Rights, and then I'll explain why it's a bad idea. And the logic behind it being a bad idea is just breathtakingly easy and simple, instantly grasped by any 3-year-old on planet Earth. But it's a bad idea because the Bill of Rights has done nothing but rob us of thousands and thousands and thousands of liberties. By itself, it's done that. It, by itself, has turned the federal government into the all-powerful, all-consuming monster Leviathan that we live with today. By itself, it did that. And it took the U.S. Constitution, which operated on Principle X, and turned it on its head exactly, precisely, 180 degrees, destroyed the U.S. Constitution by itself, period. Now, how could I say such a thing? The framers had an idea for protecting liberties. It was very, very similar, and yet completely opposite, diametrically opposed to the Bill of Rights idea, the Bill of Rights strategy. The framers said, what we're going to do, much like the Bill of Rights, we're going to write a little list, like the Bill of Rights, a very little list. And on this list, you will find the powers, the authorities, the rights, whatever word you want to use, of the federal government. Anything not on this list belongs to the people in the states. Now, what can the federal government do? I believe there are 29 items on the list, boring, mundane things. They can raise an army, they can secure the border, they can establish post roads, they can have customs duties, boring. Anything not on that list is retained by the people. On that list, of course, you will not find anything about taking your guns, suppressing your free speech, or telling you who to worship. The old First Amendment, the big three, and, peaceably assemble. You will find nothing to give the federal government the power to do that. Every single thing in the Bill of Rights, every single thing, was already off limits to the federal government by the enumeration, Article 1, Section 8. I should know that by heart, but I think it's Article 1, Section 8, the powers of the federal government. So the framers They said that the Bill of Rights is unnecessary, preposterous, and dangerous. I think we see why it was unnecessary and preposterous. They said very clearly, your liberties are secure. There is no power here given to the federal government to take your guns. So we don't need to write that down, okay? I think anybody can instantly grasp that. Why? That's why it was unnecessary and preposterous. Now we get to the bad stuff. Why is the Bill of Rights dangerous? Well, the Bill of Rights will lead you to the world in which we live today. And here's that world. 99.9999% of every living being on planet Earth believes that the federal government can, for example, establish a Department of Education. And why is that? Well, let's look at the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights can't take your guns, can't tell you who to worship, can't keep you from peaceably assembling. Doesn't say anything here about no Department of Education. Bang, legal, constitutional. They can do it. Everyone on this planet believes that. They look at the Bill of Rights and say, you, the people, have this tiny little list of rights. Anything not on the list belongs to the federal government. The federal government can do anything it wants, anytime it wants, all day, every day. A welfare system, Medicare, Social Security, welfare, 60% of the federal budget, Department of Education, Department of Transportation. They can do anything they want. I remember Donald Trump's first term when he banned bump stocks, or I think he tried to. I think the ban went through. And, I'm on all the conservative websites, and everyone, 99.9% of the people on that website, well, of course it's constitutional. I'm looking at the Second Amendment, and the Second Amendment says the feds won't take my guns. It doesn't say they won't ban bump stocks, so they can ban bump stocks. I think it's very clear at this point, clear and obvious. The two strategies for protecting rights are diametrically opposed. They're the exact opposite. And if you use the Bill of Rights strategy, the people are going to be screwed every time. I quote, I think it's Franklin Pierce in the book. He says, there's a bill in front of him to give welfare to drought-stricken farmers. Okay, they need money for seed or something. And he reads the Constitution the way I read it, and he says, I cannot undertake to place my finger on the part of the Constitution that allows me to expend the money of my constituents for benevolence, or however he phrased it. In other words, he read the enumeration, and he was looking for the part of the enumeration that says you can give welfare to drought-stricken farmers, or you can help farmers, or you can help people in need, or you can help people who are suffering through a drought. He read the enumeration, and he did not find those words there. Your money stayed in your pocket. If he had read the Bill of Rights, he'd have been looking for the line that says, the government will not give money to farmers. He would not have found that line, and your money would have vanished. The Bill of Rights destroyed the U.S. Constitution, and the men who wrote the Constitution predicted exactly and precisely that. You've seen it in the book. They said many times, if you list a few certain rights, you will create the impression that those are all the rights. That's the world we live in today. And I know of two public intellectuals, I don't know, maybe I'm getting off subject. I don't know why I'm the only one who seems to know this. I know of two public intellectuals who wrote essays, and they nailed the part about why the Bill of Rights is unnecessary and preposterous. They admitted that. And then they said, they both concluded with madness. Thank God, though, I understand that it's really unnecessary because these rights were already protected by the Constitution. But thank God we got the Bill of Rights anyway, because we've seen that the federal government has grown into a monster and seized everything. And if not for the Bill of Rights, we wouldn't even have these few rights here. And my head just catches on fire. It's because, well, why is it that one of them says politicians think they can do anything not forbidden by the Bill of Rights? And I'm like, well, why is that? Well, it's because of the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights created that impression that you can do anything not prohibited by the Bill of Rights. It blows my mind that I was reading these two, and they came this close, that close to getting the whole enchilada, and they blew it in the end. That's misconception number one. The Bill of Rights is a dreadful, terrible idea. And who cares? Rick Lynch, no one has ever heard of me, probably no one ever will hear of me, but I'm not saying that. The men who wrote the Constitution and rejected the idea nearly unanimously They are the ones who said that. If you want, it's up to you, of course. Before getting into the money part of the book, I can tell you the rather fascinating tale of how the Bill of Rights came to exist when the man who wrote the Constitution thought it was such a dreadful idea, because it is a fascinating tale. It's raw-boned, raw-knuckle politics, but still an interesting tale if you'd like to hear it.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be interesting because I think when we look through history, a lot of what our nation was based on in its founding and all the different documents throughout history, all the way back to the Magna Carta that gave us liberties and rights, all of them were not laying out specifics of what people had the right to do. Mm-hmm. It was limiting the powers that be all the way back to the Magna Carta.
That's very interesting because Hamilton, I believe it was Hamilton, wrote another brilliant point. Then we'll get to how the bill came to exist. Hamilton said, in the past and in certain circumstances, bills of rights had a good and logical place and served man. And he gave an example. He said, if you have a king who all legislative power rests with the king, all of it, you have a revolution, and you cut his head off, and you have a revolution, and you manage to rip from the royal grip a few rights, and this is what happened in England. Okay, look, you guys, don't cut my head off. I'll give you this, I'll give you this, this, and this. You've got 5 rights, 6, 10. Write them down. That makes sense. Hamilton says our situation is 100% opposite the situation of those serfs. We are creating a government wherein the people already have all the legislative power. We have the legislative power. It's 100 billion rights. We can't write this down. We are willing to compromise to secure the blessings of government. And, government, without government, you have, the state of nature, where life is, I'm sure you've heard, nasty, brutish, and short. If you want to avoid that, you have to have government, and we've got 1 billion rights. Here are the ones, the few, that we are willing to compromise to have a wonderful society. So we were in a different situation. We borrowed an idea from those serfs, list our rights, and again, the framers would never have attempted such a thing. When the framers said, list all the rights of men, I'm sure such an idea never occurred to anyone at the convention, he said. But we borrowed an idea from them. We're going to list some of our rights, and we became them. We listed a few, and now those are the only rights we have. It's incredible. It's absolutely amazing to me. But how did the bill come to be? This is a great story. And it's interesting because James Madison wrote the Constitution. He was most opposed to the Bill of Rights. He wrote the Constitution, and here 10 minutes later, people want to amend it, and he was like, "No, I'm not into that." He actually wrote the Bill of Rights. How and why did this come to pass? The man who was most demanding of the Bill of Rights, the man who wanted it more than anyone, Patrick Henry, after he saw what James Madison wrote, he refused absolutely to support the bill. So the biggest opponent actually writes it, and the biggest proponent refuses to support it. Why is this? Very simply, Patrick Henry is a big, big deal in Virginia, and he is vehemently opposed to the U.S. Constitution. He just doesn't like the idea at all. He fears that the federal government will become a monster. I have to say, I think Henry was wrong. Eventually, the federal government became what he feared, but it took 150 years. So I'm not sure that I side with Henry on this, but he was very much opposed to the U.S. Constitution. Now, and he was head of the Anti-Federalists in Virginia, a very powerful faction. Under the original U.S. Constitution, who picks senators from each state? Not popular election, the legislature does. Who controls the legislature? Patrick Henry. So James Madison, with his gigantic stature, should have been a senator in the first U.S. Congress, a senator from Virginia. But Patrick Henry says, no, Jimmy, I don't think so, because you are not an anti-federalist, and I don't like this federal government you created. So Madison says, okay, you guys want a Bill of Rights? I'll give you a Bill of Rights. Fine, I'm going to write you a Bill of Rights. Hoping, therefore, to get the House seat, which he does get. He runs, and because, again, the House is elected by popular election in his own home district. So he says, I'll give you guys a Bill of Rights. So they elect him. He's in the House. That is how the Bill of Rights came to be. But it's an incredible thing because it's an amazing thing. I quote in the book, someone had written about this. So here's Madison. He's supposed to create a Bill of Rights. He really doesn't want to. He doesn't want to change the Constitution that, again, he just wrote 10 minutes ago. So he cleverly designed the Bill of Rights, as I quote in the book. I'm quoting now from the book, From Parchment to Power, in the foreword of that book. Madison carefully crafted the Bill of Rights to change not one single word of the original U.S. Constitution. And if I already covered that, the Bill of Rights changed nothing. The federal government was already prohibited from taking your guns, telling you who to worship, imposing a religious test, etc., quartering troops in your house. The Bill of Rights, carefully crafted to change not one single word of the U.S. Constitution. That was the trick that Madison played on the anti-federalists and whatnot. And that's why Patrick Henry refused to support it. He read what Madison had written. Patrick Henry's no dummy. He says, well, you didn't do anything, so I'm not supporting this. Patrick Henry wanted other things, such as a prohibition on the standing army, et cetera, et cetera. What Patrick Henry really wanted, though, was he really wanted a brand new convention to start from scratch, and Madison's plan thrown straight into the toilet. That's what he wanted. He wanted another convention to start from scratch. So that's how we came to have the Bill of Rights. And the great irony, the incredible irony here is Madison or Henry fears the all-powerful federal Leviathan, and the Bill of Rights that he insisted on eventually creates the monster that he feared. It's just, to me, just a fascinating tale.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like we've turned the founding of our country into some type of religion, and that these are spiritual texts that is just, completely perfect, and we can't question anything from the narrative that we've been taught. And, even in the Declaration of Independence, and maybe this is a good way to get to the money side of things, but I've heard a lot of people say that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness always should have been life, liberty, and property. Well,
it was. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is a quotation stolen. I'm not stolen. It was a very, very, very famous quotation from John Locke. John Locke is the one who, a huge influence on the framers, a Scottish philosopher from 100 years earlier. John Locke developed the philosophy of property rights, and again, property being your money. We'll get to that. And in John Locke's second treatise on civil government, I believe that's where it came from, he talked about that was government's job, to protect the blessings of, or whatever, life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. So the framers didn't steal it because of the quotation was so famous. That would be like me saying 7 years ago. No, everyone knows that I didn't write that, okay? It was not plagiarism. You'll get people who say it's plagiarism. No. Everyone knew they were quoting John Locke. But they changed the word from property to happiness. And I have looked very, very hard to find a definitive reason why they changed that. And all I get is theories. Apparently no one knows exactly. But the theory I like the most is the framers were afraid that you guaranteed the people the right to pursue property. They would read that as a guarantee that they would have property. I like that. I like that formulation, and it keeps with what I know about the framers and property. But yes, the second thing about the U.S. Constitution that no one seems to understand is that the framers valued, for the framers, the most important, certainly in a political context, the most important of your sacred rights, your God-given rights, your natural rights, as opposed to your civil rights, which are not as important. The most important of those is the right to your money. Let's get into that. Jumping ahead, no, taxes are not criminal. Taxes are not illegitimate. We'll get to that in a moment. But the framers, some of my favorite quotations, and if you delve into this, you'll just find quotation after quotation after quotation after quotation. The framers' burning obsession with property, it just comes through as subtly as a blast furnace. I think my favorite quotations are John Adams. The moment the idea is introduced into society that property is not as sacred as the laws of God, anarchy and tyranny commence. Property must be secured or liberty cannot exist. Describing America's first welfare program as alarming as the mark of the beast in Revelation. You may notice a pattern there. I quote another author. You'll notice that the framers almost always speak of property in, quote, starkly religious tones. Another writer said the framers had an almost religious respect for property. You can scratch that word almost. It's religious in the truest sense of the word. Your right to keep your property is every bit as sacred, God-given, as your right to free speech. One more quotation. I love this. John Adams, talking about the French Revolution going on. And he was seeing it devolve into mass democracy, which of course we don't have. We don't have a democracy. And he said that if it goes down this road, the French will find, as we have found, said John Adams, important, referring to problems in the country, the French will find, as we have found, that property will be as the lamb committed to the custody of the world. The lamb committed to the world is straight from the Bible, and again, starkly religious tones. And in that biblical quotation, the lamb is Jesus Christ. In John Adams' formulation, the lamb is money. I just don't know how to... I could sit here and read quotations all day long about the framers and their religious obsession with money. But as I say, do not get the idea that taxes are illegitimate. It's a very, very simple proposition. It's the exact, I have the right to self-defense. When I leave the dreaded state of nature, which we already mentioned, where life is nasty, brutish, and short, and I enter into civil society to escape the dreaded state of nature, you compromise all of your rights. You necessarily compromise them. I have a right to self-defense, yes. I do not have a right to take my fully loaded machine gun and lay it on the defendant's table in front of me when they read the verdict in my murder trial. I do not have the right to... I have free speech. I don't have the right to shout fire in a crowded theater. I don't have the right... I have the right to say the government is terrible, but I can't go to the old folks' home Sunday at 3 a.m. with a sound truck and bullhorns and say the government's terrible, okay? Your rights are compromised. And the right, your sacred God-given right to your money is the exact same. Someone's got to secure that border. Someone has to pay for that army, and that someone is you. Your rights are compromised when you enter into civil society. However, here's the big mistake that Americans make today, in the entire nation, the entire society. They think that their speech rights, their First Amendment rights, worship and all that, the big three of the First Amendment, they believe that those rights are mega, mega, mega sacred, and they can only be compromised that much only when absolutely necessary. Something I agree with. They seem to think, if they have any concept whatsoever, that your property rights, however, every single penny you own is now a free-for-all for the government. Every single dime they can legitimately take for you and spend for anything whatsoever. I need to be clear about this. The most hardcore right-wing fanatic in the world will say, of that spending, what did Doge find out? We sent $8 million to Sri Lanka to give to journalists to teach them to use non-offensive, non-binary language, whatever. Binary language, non-binary, whatever. Even the most hardcore right-wing fanatic in the country would look at that spending and say, ridiculous, wasteful, outrageous, disgusting, stupid, but never in my life, ever, have I heard a human being describe it the way the framers would have described it. They just said that was a violation of your sacred, God-given natural right. Your property, if you want to know the philosophical background, your property is created by your mind and your soul and your body and your hands and your labor. Just in case you want to know why the framers would have called it a sacred right. When you create property, the property becomes mixed with your very existence. The property and you mix, and the nature of the property changes, and it becomes an extension of yourself. I think people see this clearly enough. I think they see it when they picture a man walking into the woods with an axe, and he makes a cabin, and he clears a field, and he grows chickens, and the chickens lay eggs. You'd ask somebody, who do those eggs belong to? Well, that man, of course. If, however, you decide to create property by going into a building of steel and concrete and glass, and you examine spreadsheets for 40 hours a week, people seem to think that, yeah, of course the government can send it to Sri Lanka. I don't know where this crazy idea comes from, because those situations are logically identical. One man created property in the form of a paycheck with his mind, body, hand, soul, and labor. Another man created property with his mind, body, hand, soul, and labor, only he created chicken eggs. No difference. Logically, no difference whatsoever. So again, you have to pay taxes, but your property, the money in your pocket, is a God-given sacred natural right. And the framers, as I said, John Adams, the moment the idea is introduced into society that property is not sacred as the laws of God, anarchy and tyranny commence, you will get a few people who will try to argue with you this nonsense that when the framers say property, they don't mean money. No, they don't mean money. They mean like landed estates. Well, Google that in 10 seconds, you'll get a billion results. John Adams himself said, a man's property is his land, his this, his that, his currency, his money. John Adams himself said it. It's ridiculous to think that it doesn't. And you can find, a million results on any Google search. And yes, when the framers mean property, they mean your shoelaces, your paycheck, your house, your car, the whole 9 yards. People will go to great lengths to deny that, and I don't know why. Because can you think of a more morally bankrupt philosophy than the one that says, if you're the great man in the great house on the hill and you own 1,000 acres, you're entitled to some kind of special protection from the government. But if the great man pays me, $50 to mow his lawn, my property, the $50 that I just created, that's, they can send that to Sri Lanka. I find that just insane. So that was the other. That's number two. People laugh at a lot of government spending, but they just think it's ridiculous. And it's way beyond ridiculous. My allergies are kicking in, so pills.
Well, and it almost seems like, really we don't have any other rights when it comes down to it, because all the other supposed rights that we have are just a means of protecting our property, really.
That's I think that's probably one of the reasons. In Federalist 10, one of the reasons, before I get off track, that the framers see property as so vitally important, is the most important of the natural rights. That's another thing. There's a great quotation in the book that says the framers valued life, liberty, and property. All but four of the framers, said the author of this other book, Novus Ordo Seclorum, all but four of the framers, the four who disagreed, would actually have put property in front of liberty. Life, property, liberty. That's how the framers saw your property rights. And that's another thing, too. There's a quotation in the book from James Madison. It's funny because I say that property rights, nobody knows them, they're ignored, they're forgotten. And that's not quite true, because in one respect, for your entire life and my entire life, our nation has been absolutely enthralled to property rights and worships it. It's just that someone has deleted the property part of it. And here's what I mean by that. James Madison explains, your property rights, because you own yourself, Madison explains, your property rights include your rights to conscience, to freedom of speech, to worship as you choose, to be your own person, to think your own thoughts. This is all included, Madison says, in the term property rights, all of it. Because you own yourself. And then he goes on to say, and of course, that term also includes the monetary aspect. See, the framers could easily, Locke coined the term. The framers could have called it conscience rights. There's a reason they did not call it conscience rights, and they called it property rights instead. Because yes, of all those rights, they saw that that in a political context, money and property were the most important. Because as Madison says in Federalist 10, that's another thing that I find amazing. If you were to Google best Federalist, the Federalist Papers, 78 essays, Hamilton, Madison, and Jay. If you were to Google the best of the essays, or the most famous of the essays, 99 out of 100 of your Google searches will tell you that Federalist 10 is the best and most famous of these essays. And that is amazing to me because right there in the essay, James Madison says, why do we have government at all? The reason we have government is because men can't stop tearing each other's throats. And what is the most significant cause of men tearing each other's throats? He didn't say it that brutally. What is the most significant cause? The unequal distribution of property. Right there in Federalist 10. The unequal distribution of property, which is brought about by the unequal distribution of your brains and my brains and our ability to, Bill Gates has more money than me, okay? Because I can barely turn the computer on. I struggle to do that. He goes on to say, that is why we have government. Government's instituted to protect these faculties that produce different amounts of property, okay? Then he goes on to say, right in Federalist 10, and again, why am I the only one who can read Federalist 10? I don't know. I don't understand. He goes on to say, he lists seven different problems or issues that the Constitution is designed to make sure don't happen, to lessen, 7 things. Every single one of the 7 problems he describes that the U.S. Constitution is going to fix is 100% about money and nothing else. The landed interest versus the importing interest, the this financial interest for that, the debtor versus the borrower, Every single one of the 7. And the last 3, and this brings us to paper money, the last 3 of the 7 that James Madison says our Constitution will fix are welfare programs. He's paper money, the abolition of debt, which is a thing at the time. Paper money and abolition of debt go hand in hand. And the levelers. Back in the day, the levelers are those who wanted to level society and make sure everyone was equal from a financial aspect. 7 things he lists, all of them 100% about money, 3 of them are welfare programs. Right there in Federalist 10, that's what government is all about, he says. And yet, most people read Federalist 10 and they fixate on the part where Madison says that a union such as ours, spread over a huge territory with, the people of Vermont are very different from the people of Virginia. All these multiplicity of interests, he says. Quite true. He says, a diverse republic like ours, evil, terrible people will find it very hard to get majority support for their evil, terrible plans. People fixate on that. And I'm like, well, what about the money? And by the way, even that thought, he says they will have trouble getting majority support for their evil, terrible plans. And that's where he lists 3 evil, terrible plans. Abolition of debt, such as, he says, paper money, abolition of debt, or the leveling of society. It's welfare, welfare, welfare. And no one gets it. Don't know why. Which brings us to paper money. Do you have any questions, or should I just dive right in?
Well, I guess I was kind of thinking about, the same way with our rights, all these political issues that we have separated economic and social issues, but really it's all one and the same.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And not only have we separated them, we've decided that some of them, our free speech is so vitally and incredibly important. Pornography of the most radical kind you can imagine is free speech. Okay. If you apply that same view to protecting my money, do you think they just sent $8 million of mine to Sri Lanka to teach journalists how to be nice people? I don't think so. Yeah, not only are they separate, one of them is protected by foaming at the mouth fanatics, and the other is seen, again, not as a right at all. At all. I can't believe that people think that every single penny that they've ever earned or ever will earn legitimately belongs to the government Every penny. And the things that they allow us to keep, we should be grateful for. But they get first dibs. Where does that crazy, sick idea come from? I have no idea.
Well, and
But
I just look at like an issue like gay marriage or something. Obviously, I have pretty strong opinions on that issue, but at the end of the day, what somebody else does with their life has a lot less effect on me, and I care a lot less about that than the things that we just shrug off about what the government does with our money and the different, the way corporations get loopholes and bailouts to take advantage of us as consumers, and it's totally backwards.
Yeah. Oh yeah. My wife was telling me something about. I wish I remembered the details about tax preparing and the tax attorney lobby. God, why am I even saying this? There are 100 billion trillion things. Have you ever seen the federal budget? It's 80,000. I mean, it's a trillion things in there. Every single person with $2 to rub together has a lobbyist whose sole job is to steal from you. It's just the examples can never, ever, ever stop. But that brings us to paper money. The third great, gigantic thing that I think that no one understands about the Constitution is, why do we have the U.S. Constitution? How did it come about? I spent most of my life thinking, okay, we beat the British. Bye. We need a new government. Just that simple. Completely, totally wrong. We already had a government. That government, the Articles of Confederation, flawed as it was with us throughout the war and was around for 6 entire years following the final British defeat at Yorktown. What is it that prompted the framers to say, we have big, big problems here and we need a new government to address them? It was America's first welfare program. If you read the notes from the convention especially, but the Federalist Papers too, it's constantly mentioned. Remember, Madison said, what terrible things will the Constitution crush? The abolition of debts, leveling society, and paper money. Paper money crisis, something you never ever heard of, is the reason that we have a Constitution, period. We know this, again, we mostly know it from reading the convention notes, but I have two data points I like to go to. Richard Henry Lee, anti-federalist, and he's writing the anti-federalist papers in opposition to the Federalist Papers, in opposition to the new government, and he admits it in one of his essays. He says, look, several state legislatures, by making paper money laws, have given just cause of unease to creditors. This abuse of the power in the legislature, which has been charged upon the democratic part of the community, meaning the common man, the majority, the poor man, has prepared many honest men for changes in government, which otherwise they would not have thought of. Paper money has prepared James Madison and the boys for a change in government which they otherwise would not have thought of. James Madison wrote another famous essay called Vices of the American Political System just before the convention, explaining why we're having this convention. Because of these vices of the American political system. He lays out 12 different vices. Paper money was only one of those 12, but it was the very first one listed, and it took up 1,200 words of a 3,100 word essay. What more do you need to know? 1,200 of 3,100 words were dedicated to the one single vice, paper money. What is paper money? It's a very simple welfare scheme, and it's happening in Rhode Island. Rhode Island was the worst case. The framers, Rhode Island gave them nightmares. Farmers wake up one day. It's an age-old story to this very day. Farmers need lots of money at the beginning of the year, and at the end of the year, they hope to get it in the harvest. They have to borrow money. They've known it for a billion years. They go to creditors and they say, and creditors, here, I will lend you $10 in gold coin. You will repay me $12 in gold coin or silver. Okay? Farmers get this wild idea in their state legislatures. Okay? They're like, hey, I know what. In my district, there are 800 farmers and there is one creditor. We're going to go knock on our rep's door, and we're going to say, you're going to print paper money that's worth nothing, not quite nothing. You're going to print nearly worthless paper money for us that we are going to take to our creditors, and we're going to give them this worthless paper money. That's it. Our debt's clear. And because the state, as one delegate said, the experiences, the reason we're here at this convention, all the evils can be traced to the excesses of democracy. The state governments were too democratic, and the common man, the poor man, the majority, had all the power. So the legislature, here's your paper money. They take it to the creditor. The creditor says, I'm not taking this junk. The farmer says, fine. They go back to the legislature. Here's the next law you're going to pass. You're going to make it mandatory that these guys take this money. Legislature, sure, no problem. At this point, this is a very, very telling tale. In the state of Rhode Island, the creditors actually flee the state. They flee the state. They leave their homes to avoid taking the dreaded paper money. So for all you people out there, don't worry about the rich. They'll always take care of themselves. They'll grease the skids. Don't worry about them. In the face of unchecked democracy, their wealth and their power were absolutely meaningless. They had to flee their homes to avoid the paper money. So the farmers go, this is incredible. They go back and they say, here's the next law you're going to pass. You're going to pass a law that says Farmer John takes the $10. He walks into a bank. He lays it on the counter. Farmer John takes out an ad in the newspaper saying, I just paid off this money at Joe Smith Bank. Debt's canceled. They got that law passed. They actually got laws passed to cancel debts. Back to James Madison. The three things we're going to avoid: paper money, abolition of debt, levelers of society. They got laws to cancel debts, laws to withhold payment. These are called installment laws. Okay, you owe $10 on January 1st. Yeah, you can give them $6 on January 1st and the rest later. Over and over and over. The reason the Constitution of the United States was created was to crush a welfare program in which the common man, the majority, I keep calling them poor, but these really weren't poor the way we think. They owned their own farms, okay? They just weren't wealthy. The Constitution of the United States came into existence to crush a welfare program and protect the wealthy minority. When the framers talk of minority and majority in the Federalist Papers, it's incredible. 90% of the time they use that term, when they use minority, they're talking about rich people. It's a very simple formulation. If that sounds radical, it's not remotely radical. Let's follow the chain of logic. The framers knew that whoever has political power is going to oppress those who do not have political power, period. Who's got political power? The oligarch, the tyrant, the king, the aristocrat, no matter who, including the common man. If the common man has all the political power, he's not any worse. The framers are very clear on this. The common man, the majority, the poor people, are no worse than the aristocrats. They are very clear on this. The framers, though, created a situation where the common man had the power. James Madison wrote, if rich people have a terrible idea and they want to foist it on the country, he said, the Republican principle will thwart them, meaning there's only two of you rich people. The state legislature is going to laugh you out of the chamber because there are 800 poor people. The framers created a situation, rightfully so, where the common man holds the lion's share of political power. Therefore, this gets to myth number 4, checks and balances. All checks and all balances are directed squarely against the common man. All of them, because they hold the political power. Jefferson and Madison both make this very clear. They say, probably the best quotations in the entire book, they say, people seem to think that checks and balances are to keep a rogue senator from doing some criminal acts against the people. They said, no, it's not that way at all. Checks and balances are designed to stop legislators not from screwing the people, but from giving to the people what it is that they actually want. Because so often, what the people want is the property of others. that to me, I always say there are three things in my book that I expose: the Bill of Rights, your sacred property, and that the Constitution came into being to crush a welfare program. Maybe I should add the fourth, because the idea that checks and balances are directed against the people, and that they're designed not to keep rogue senators from screwing the people, but to keep legislators from giving to the people what it is that they want. Because the framers saw with paper money so often what the people want, again, just the common man, no better or no worse than the aristocrat. The aristocrat in a position of power screws the common man. Common man in a position of power is going to screw the aristocrat.
That's really interesting, because on just artificial intelligence and what's going to happen when everybody's job eventually is displaced, and you have a majority of people that fall into socialism. And I kind of make the case in that it might be the corrupt lobbyists that save us in the end.
That is I just have to say, a can of worms that I again, I don't even have a smartphone. That's a fact. That's how low tech I am. I do have an iPad. Where is AI headed? God only knows. God only knows. But I'm a little frightened by it. I guess if history is any guide, these technological advancements, they were always frightening, but in the end, they always were good. I mean, I think I saw a statistic that in 1950, under 5% of all the jobs that existed in 1900 were still left. They were all gone. And yet, because in 1900, over 90% of all Americans were farmers. By 1950, that was under 10%. So all those jobs vanished. And yet, there were other jobs. So it's frightening, but please don't ask me about it, because, again, I don't even own a smartphone.
Well, and it goes back to the religious part of all this, too, that we were getting into about, Adam Smith's invisible hand. I've always looked at that and thought, I'm a Christian person, and that, to me, that's just God. And, I kind of look at these things about property and just capitalism and the system we have. It's not some great economic theory that we developed in the West. It's inherent to our human nature. It's God-given to us.
I'm glad you said that, because somebody, I hate the term capitalist system. I don't think, I forget who the writer was. Somebody said capitalism is what people do when they are left alone. I don't like this system. It almost makes it seem like it's a bunch of ideas that the government foisted upon us. I don't see that capitalism is that at all. Capitalism is what people do when they are left alone. And I forget who the great writer said. I'm speaking of religion. Here's another thing. My God, my book's just chock full of things that nobody knows. This might blow your mind, and I will quote from Novus Ordo Seclorum. Now, I urge you and all your listeners, anybody who doesn't believe this, I checked it myself this morning. I Googled it. I forget the words I Googled. The Bill of Rights, after the Bill of Rights is ratified, the first words of the First Amendment read, "Congress shall make no law." Here's something that virtually nobody knows, but Google in 5 seconds, and you'll go from saying that I'm out of my mind, psychopath, to, oh, God, I guess he's right. The Bill of Rights did not apply to the states at all, period, full stop. Did not apply to the states, period, until well into the 20th century, when the Supreme Court had some crazy-ass rulings, which is all the Supreme Court ever does. The Bill of Rights was not meant to apply to the states and did not apply to the states. There's some logic behind that. At the time that the Bill of Rights was ratified, the state of Virginia, for example, had been largely self-governing for going on 300 years. 1607 to 1800. What is that? It's over 200 years. It's going on 300 years. Nobody in any of the states believed that they needed the federal government to tell them anything about running, quote, their internal police. Nobody in any state believed that at all. Now, the framers would have disagreed, at least on the point of paper money, and one of the framers says that at the convention. Well, of course, the federal government shouldn't interfere with the internal police, especially when it comes to cases like paper money. The burning obsession is just never goes away. Anyway, this may blow your mind. The Bill of Rights did not apply to the states, leaving the states free with their own internal police powers. This is from the book Novus Ordo Seclorum. What does that power include? Okay? Remember, the federal government secures the border, has an army and a navy, customs duties, post roads, boring. Murder was not a federal crime. Now, you probably know this. I mean, the number of times you could not charge somebody, the Mississippi civil rights case, they charged them with violating their civil rights because they could not charge them with murder, okay? Federal jurisdiction is limited. Listen to this from the book Novus Ordo Seclorum. This will blow your mind. Most of the colonies had tax-supported churches. This continued long after the Bill of Rights was ratified. All except Rhode Island imposed legal restrictions on various religious sects, and penalties for dissenters, apostates, blasphemers, and idolaters were numerous and severe. The states could establish the mode and manner of religious worship and instruction. They could levy taxes for the support of religion. They could stifle dissent, stifle freedom of the press, of speech, of inquiry. They could regulate food and drink and clothing for purposes of religious and moral instruction. That's sumptuary laws. You are not allowed to wear rich vestments, purple garments. They could tell you what to eat and drink. Why is this absolutely incredible? This is the powers that were left to the states. But do you know what powers were not left to the states? In Article 1, Section 10, the framers said the states are not allowed to impair contracts, going back to paper money. They are not allowed to make anything with gold and silver a medium of exchange. They cannot print paper money. They cannot abolish debts, etc., etc. Think about that for a moment. If you want to know how the framers viewed your money, state-supported church, not a problem. State-sponsored welfare paper money program, not a chance. To me, you will never find a more clear example of just how the framers viewed your money. The states, again, the last state-supported church in this country, Google it, did not disappear, I think, until the 1830s. State-supported church, not a problem. Welfare, not a chance. I just, that state-supported church, the framers at the convention didn't write a syllable, utter a word, or lift a finger to change that state of affairs. A lot of people, and I don't know about you, a lot of people when they hear this, they don't like it. They're a little distressed. Maybe the framers should have tried to rein in that kind of thing, but they did not. And if anybody wants to be angry at the framers for not reining that in, I would only tell them this. None of the states was ever going to ratify a U.S. Constitution that gave this new federal government, unknown and untrusted, the power to regulate their internal policies. That was not going to happen. So you can hate the framers all you want for, letting Massachusetts, they really had a state-supported church, continue their state-supported church. You can hate them if you want, but if the framers had attempted to interfere with that setup, there'd be no federal government. I just think it's an amazing factoid to recognize that the states could do virtually anything they wanted, even after the Bill of Rights was ratified, because, again, the bill did not apply to the states. But they could, the one thing they could no longer, they could not, establish their own army or navy either. But if you talk about matters of internal police, no more paper money, no altering or abolishing contracts, no canceling debt. It's the paper. If you want to know why the Constitution was created, there's your answer right there. Paper money. As alarming as the mark of the beast in Revelation, said one of, I think it was Roger Sherman who said that. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah. No, and, I'm thinking now towards today and where we've come with all these different things. And, I was going to ask you, does the Constitution allow for the government that exists today? And I think we all obviously know the answer to that. But, how did we drift so far? How did we get to this point?
Well, the Bill of Rights. The federal government used to have 10, this tiny little list of rights, powers, and authorities. And we had that much. The federal government had that much. You take an approach exactly opposite the framers' approach, and you create another tiny little list. Now we have that much, and the federal government's got that much. The Bill of Rights is to blame. People, here's one way I think I can show that. Every single year, I drop something on the floor. Every single year of the existence of this country, there have been 100 trillion federal court cases that revolve around what are the rights, powers, and authorities of the federal government. It started from day one and it goes to today. I mean, almost every Supreme Court case comes down to does the federal government have the authority to do this? Now imagine, because people say, again, people would have forgotten the enumeration and it would have been cast aside, et cetera, et cetera. It certainly has been because of the Bill of Rights. But if you had 10,000 court cases from day one of the existence of this country that deal with the powers of the federal government, and your rights, each and every single one of those court cases would have referred back to the enumeration. Period. What else would it refer back to? The part that says elections are in November? If you want to know, can the federal government do this to you, a court case will turn to the enumeration. And a billion court cases would have turned to the enumeration over the last 200 years, 250 years. The enumeration would never, ever, ever have been forgotten. Period. It's not humanly possible. Again, it is the only place in the Constitution where you can find your rights. The federal government is allowed. Suppose the federal government wanted to seize my property to do X, Y, and Z. Okay? No court case is ever going to say, well, let us see here in Article 1, Section whatever, the federal government has the right to define piracy and punish it. No court case is ever going to say, what's that got to do with anything? Nothing. That court case, would the federal government do they have the right to do this to you or me? Do they have the right does the federal government have the right to establish a church? You would refer to the enumeration and you would say, no. They have the right to establish post roads, but not a church. People will insist that thank God for the Bill of Rights because the enumeration would have been forgotten somehow. I don't know why. They're both little lists. They're approximately the same size. Why would it have been forgotten? I have no idea. I think it's ridiculous to say so.
So what's the strongest argument that you feel like people bring against your case, and then kind of how would you debunk that?
Well, I usually only hear nonsense. For years, people have told me that when the framers say property, they don't mean money. That's ridiculous. Again, James Madison himself describes property as money. And if it didn't, that would be philosophically and morally bankrupt and weird. If you say that you took a hammer and you created something and therefore it's yours and that's sacred. However, you take a hammer and you create something and you want an apple, but the guy you created it for doesn't have any apples, so he gave you $1 instead. Oh, that's not sacred. The apple would have been sacred, but he didn't have an apple, so he gave you $1. That's not sacred. Okay, so that's nonsense. I also hear that, again, thank God for the Bill of Rights, because if not for that, we wouldn't even have those rights. I just think that's nonsensical. The Bill of Rights is known to every living being on the planet. In absence of the Bill of Rights, the enumeration would be known to every living being on the planet. It's just that simple. Of course, a lot of people say that on the federal jurisdiction thing, this is an old argument. The General Welfare Clause gives the federal government the power to do anything it wants. I have 3, 4, 5 quotes from the framers themselves saying that's pure nonsense. The General Welfare Clause, they say, is separated from the enumeration, the list of federal powers, by, quote, a semicolon. So we were speaking from the general, then moving to the specific, the framers say. The General Welfare Clause gives no power outside of the enumeration, which is separated from it by a semicolon. You get that argument. The Supreme Court has been saying the Interstate Commerce Clause. People will still latch onto that. The federal government has the power to regulate interstate commerce. For well over 100 years, the Supreme Court ruled that the federal government can regulate anything that might affect interstate commerce. And believe me, the case where that started was a man growing chickens on his own land for his own consumption. Well, of course that might affect interstate commerce because he's not buying chickens from an interstate conglomerate. Now, if the federal government can regulate, then of course the federal government has absolute dictatorial, the federal government is totalitarian at that point. I take my own baths. Well, there are very large companies that provide bathing help to people, and they operate across state lines. So by you taking your own bath, Rick, you are affecting interstate commerce by not using them. If you buy that nonsensical argument, the federal government's totalitarian. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard an argument that reached beyond being ridiculous and silly and insane. Maybe the only one is, well, in this modern world, we simply can't have a federal government with such a tiny jurisdiction. I don't see why not. Remember, the powers left to the states are rather huge. The states, if the states want to establish a social security system for retirees, they're able to do so. If they want to build a road network, they're able to do so. I mean, even now, we have states that restrict certain parts of the internet. Okay, ta-da! Where's the problem? I don't know. So, I like the framers here, and I don't see much to argue against it.
Yeah, so I've heard a lot of, maybe not a lot, but I've heard some of these, ideas and stuff, but never really with the clear intent in mind of kind of the case that you're making here. So I'm kind of shocked that none of this has ever been compiled in a clear and comprehensive way like this before.
I swear to you, I've spent 30 years wondering how is it that I don't know, do I sound egotistical? How is it that only I seem to know any of this stuff? Again, Federalist 10, go read it right now. It's about money. It's about money and nothing else. We have government because men attack each other. Why do men attack each other? Because of money. And we have to protect the faculties that produce that money. And the Constitution will solve these 7 problems. Money, 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 money. Everyone. I don't know. The Bill of Rights, the Federalist Papers, right there in Federalist, one of the very last Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton himself explains why there's no Bill of Rights in the Constitution. Right there in the Federalist Papers. And yet, every single person I've ever met, every single human being, I have never met someone who did not think that the framers gave us the Bill of Rights. They'll usually actually say the Founding Fathers, which is incorrect. Again, totally different group of men. I don't know. And it's actually very tough to get traction. It's tough to get anybody to listen at all. And I guess because the ideas sound so crazy. And again, especially the Bill of Rights thing, who cares who gave us the Bill of Rights? But you can't argue. I mean, you cannot argue about the effect of the Bill of Rights. And you cannot argue that people get it completely wrong. They get it absolutely wrong. Again, you go to the most foaming at the mouth conservative website you could ever imagine, and you look at the bump stock ban, and there are 10,000 conservatives right there saying a bump stock is not a gun, therefore the federal government has the power to regulate it. In other words, the federal government has the power. You know what? You know what's incredibly amazing? There's a chapter on Robert Bork. Robert Bork in the book. To me, I'll never get over this. Talk about the power to confuse. Robert Bork, I know you know who he was, came that close to the Supreme Court, wrote probably the best-selling book in the Constitution ever in history. And in that book, I quote him, I think, like 10 times. The first 5 occasions, he talks about the jurisdiction of the federal government is limited to the enumeration. Okay? The same man, writing in the same book on 5 different occasions, says, you have only those rights that the Constitution actually specifies. That's a direct quote. The same man writing in the same book writes contradictory things over and over and over because the Bill of Rights, that's the kind of confusion it sows. It it just confuses the hell out of people. You can look at the enumeration in the Bill of Rights and see that these are contradictory approaches, 100% contradictory. Here's a tiny little list of federal powers. Everything else belongs to you. Here's a tiny little list of your rights. Everything else belongs to the government. You don't get more opposite than that. They are contradictory. Now, of course, if you read the Bill of Rights very carefully, the 9th and 10th Amendments were supposed to clear that up. Listing certain rights here, it says, is not meant to disparage the existence of other rights. Read the 9th and 10th Amendments. First of all, they're at the very bottom. They should have been the first and second. And God, they are just, I don't know, I hate saying this, but if Madison himself actually wrote those, and I guess he did, he was not having a good day, because you can read those amendments 50 times and scratch your head and say, what? What? But yeah, it wasn't supposed to be that way. The 9th Amendment says, just the listing here of certain rights is not meant to disparage others. Okay, clearly the 9th and 10th Amendment did not work, did not do what they were supposed to do. But if I were going to rewrite the Bill of Rights, the 9th and 10th would have been the first and second. They would have been much more clearly written. And the Second Amendment is also a catastrophe. What? Okay, I'm getting far afield. Why does it say that part about a well-regulated militia? I don't know why it says that. But anyway.
Yeah, no, and I gotta admit, I mean, when I first heard about you and got into your book and stuff, some of the claims in the beginning, the Bill of Rights, to me, in my, upbringing and my indoctrination, I suppose.
It's a sacred totem, as I call it.
Yeah, and we have a almost religious attachment to it and to all those different documents. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, at first, almost taking offense to that and thinking how un-American, how unpatriotic, how anti-liberty. But then, about 5 seconds later, you realize, hold on a second, this is the Bill of Rights itself is what I thought the opposition to it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's to me, it's amazing. I mean, I started this journey long before I tripped upon the Bill of Rights, because I had to read this stuff for 10 years before I said, wait a minute, But it started. I was in a classroom. We were reading this book. This is an incredible book. All this book is, it goes back to the Magna Carta. Any philosopher, any politician, anybody who ever wrote anything about political philosophy that affects America is in here. It's nothing but quotations. Absolutely nothing but quotations and documents. And we're reading this book in class, and we're reading about the framers and how they were droning on obsessively about property. And I'm thinking land. I'm like, okay, I get it. I saw Gone with the Wind. I saw Scarlett O'Hara's father's speech, the sacred land linking me to my ancestors. I get it. Boy, these framers they're out of date, because nobody cares about that crap anymore. We care about our retirement plans, right? And my life changed. And started me on this journey when the professor held up his finger and he said, remember, money is property. And again, I'm in a classroom with like 40 people, and I seem to be the only person in the entire class who was affected by that. I was like, whoa, wait, what are you saying to me? I was looking for, there's another book talking about how the framers screwed up by not having the Bill of Rights. They screwed it up because these are the rights that men die for. And, that's what I always grew up with. And I ridicule that, this nonsense that I'm going to jump into a blood-filled trench to defend somebody else's free speech. Hey, maybe if I'm God, I would do that. But the book points out the causes of the American Revolution, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, they're 5 big, huge things. And the Stamp Act, the Townshend Act, the closing of the port, money. Every single thing. The immediate cause of the Constitution itself, money. That's what it comes down to in the real political world.
Well, yeah, no, this has been very informative for me, and I'm looking forward to finishing the rest of the book. I think this is pretty awesome.
How far are you? Are you at the paper money? What's paper money? Is that 3? Oh, the Second Amendment clearly explained.
Yeah, I'm in the Second Amendment. I'm not very far.
That sounds good. Yeah.
But no, I definitely think it's worth a read, and I don't know where's the best place for people to find you and find the book.
Well, it's available, quote, everywhere: Kindle, Amazon, Barnes. Wherever you buy a book, you can buy it. My website, which just buy the book. Don't go to my website. My website is rick-lynch.com, which you can link to the book there. But just go to Amazon. Money and Liberty: How the Framers' Obsession with Protecting Your Money Shaped the Constitution. Rick Lynch.
Yeah. Well, awesome. No, this has been an awesome conversation.
I love it.
Appreciate it, Rick.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, that's all I have time for. Were you offended by this podcast? Good. Hey, thanks for listening, guys. I really appreciate you all. Have a great week and stay conservative.